Welcome to a place where shadows whisper and old gods still listen. You've entered Whispers of Asia, a channel where forgotten myths, cursed rituals, and haunted folklore are not just stories, they're warnings. Here, every tale is rooted in the soil of a land that remembers, a land where silence is never empty and night is never alone. Tonight, we go deep into the swamps of southern Malaysia, a place untouched by time, where ancestral spirits still linger and mourning is not just for the living. They say you must never walk home at sunset alone, not because of what you see, but because of what follows behind. There is something older than ghosts, hungrier than demons, a spirit the locals call Bayang Gigi, the toothed shadow. At first, it mimics your every move, but then it begins to lag behind, and when it smiles, it's already too late. This is a tale of grief, guilt, and the thing that lives in your silhouette. This is the shadow that grew teeth.
They buried her brother as the tide rolled in. The villagers said it was a bad omen, the sea swallowing the earth just as the last shovel of soil fell. But for Suri, the youngest daughter of the Musa family, it only felt like silence growing louder. Her brother's name was Idris, and he was dead. 22 years old, spine broken like driftwood against a rock, found floating near the edge of the mangroves, face down, arms out, as if reaching back toward the village that had turned its back on him. Suri had been told not to cry aloud. In Kampung Bisu, mourning was private, buried like secrets, lest the things in the swamp start listening. But she had loved her brother, not the man he had become, with his wild talk and glassy eyes, but the boy who used to pluck wild hibiscus flowers and press them between the pages of her storybooks. The boy who made her laugh when their mother could only sigh. The boy who promised never to leave her behind. Now he was beneath the earth, and the tide was coming in. They performed the rites in near silence. No wailing, no music, no open lament. Only the imam's voice, quiet, low, heavy, like he was afraid to wake something buried deeper than Idris. The village elder, Toksaman, watched Suri with eyes that never blinked. He wore the white robe of tradition, but his feet were muddy, stained by swamp water. He never spoke to her, not once. When the final prayer was said, the mourners dispersed like fog. No one stayed behind. No one offered words of comfort. It was as if Idris had never existed, as if his death was not a tragedy, but an inconvenience, a reminder. Suri stood alone by the grave, wind brushing her cheeks like cold fingers. Her black shawl fluttered against the sky, a silhouette clinging to her shoulders. She whispered to the dirt, "I'm sorry, Abang. They didn't let me say goodbye." The sun had begun its slow descent. Gold turned to rust. Shadows stretched longer than their owners. And for the first time, Suri noticed hers just slightly off. It mimicked her, yes. When she moved her hand, it followed. When she turned her head, it did too. But when she stood still, she could have sworn it breathed. She blinked. The wind rustled leaves behind her. But the sound came not from the trees, it came from the ground, a sigh beneath the soil. She stepped back. Her shadow lagged half a beat, not enough to be sure, just enough to plant a seed. That night, Toksamen came to their home with offerings, a bowl of turmeric rice, a bundle of pandan leaves, and a small obsidian stone tied in red thread. He handed them to her mother without a word and turned to leave. "Is this to protect her?" Suri asked. Toksamen paused at the door, then looked back. His face was older than time, his eyes dim, his mouth a line that had forgotten how to smile. "It's not for her, it's for what follows her." Her mother locked the windows that night, lit candles at all four corners of the room, and placed the obsidian stone beneath Suri's pillow. She said nothing, only prayed with fingers tight and trembling. Suri didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling while the wind hissed through the thatched roof. Around midnight, she looked toward the far wall. Her shadow should not have been there. The lantern was to her left, and yet the shadow stood straight ahead, cast tall against the far wall. Mouth closed, hands at its sides, still. Then, a twitch. A slight movement of the hand, like a muscle spasm, but Suri hadn't moved. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the night. She closed her eyes and whispered her brother's name like a prayer. "Idris, if you're still here, help me." But the shadow didn't leave. It stayed, and at the very edge of its mouth, something pulled upward. Not a grin, a warning. The next morning, Suri woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the brittle hush that comes when something is missing. Her mother was already gone. The candles had melted into wax puddles. The bowl of turmeric rice had been placed on the doorstep, now swarming with black ants that crawled in spirals, never leaving the rim. The shadow was back to normal. It followed her like it always had, smooth, obedient, attached. She moved her hand. It moved too. She turned her face. It followed. No lag, no twitch, no mouth. Maybe she had dreamed it. Maybe grief played tricks. But something didn't feel right. She walked toward the edge of the village, barefoot on the dusty path, letting the morning sun kiss her skin. Children were playing near the riverbank, giggling and tossing pebbles, their laughter strangely too loud for the morning after a funeral. None of them looked at her. None of them cast shadows. That's when she saw it. The swamp. The mangroves stood like silent guards, their roots exposed and tangled, clawing into the muddy water. The sun was high, but the swamp had no shadows. Not one tree, not one boat, not one boy who stood fishing by the edge. It was as if the light refused to touch that place, as if the swamp swallowed not just sound, but reflection. Her breath caught. She squinted harder, thinking maybe it was the angle. But then she saw the fisherman boy lift his hand, and nothing followed. No shadow stretched at his feet, no dark outline answered his motion. Only still water and roots like twisted limbs. She stepped backward, spine tingling. The boy turned around slowly and saw her watching. He smiled, a tight, crooked smile, and pointed toward the trees. "Toksamen says we shouldn't go in today." "Why not?" "The water's listening." Suri didn't ask more. She turned and walked away. That night, the shadow came back. She had left the lantern burning near her bedside. The flickering light danced across the walls. Her body ached with sleep, but fear kept her stiff. She stayed under the blanket, one hand clutching the red-threaded obsidian stone still warm from her palm. And then, the whisper came, not from her room, not from outside, from the wall. A voice not spoken, but exhaled, thin as breath, scraping against wood grain. "Did you forget me, Adik?" She opened her eyes. The shadow stood on the far wall again, tall and still, but this time its mouth was open. A line of jagged black, no teeth yet, just a widening gap. It didn't move, it didn't blink, but she could feel it watching even without eyes. She didn't scream. Her throat wouldn't let her. She reached for the obsidian stone, but her hand stopped mid-air. The shadow had raised its hand too, not to follow her movement, to mimic the delay. There was a full second now, not a twitch, a hesitation, like it was thinking, choosing. She held her breath. The shadow's hand stayed up. Then it smiled again, wider. When dawn came, she ran to Toksamin's home at the edge of the village. His hut stood near the base of the forest, surrounded by old herbs and rotting charms hanging from wooden poles. Chickens scurried from her path as she called his name. He was waiting for her. "Suri," he said, before she could speak. "It has begun, hasn't it?" She nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I broke the mourning vow. I said his name. I cried at his grave. Toksamin raised a hand, silencing her. "It's not grief that calls it. It's guilt." She shook her head. "I didn't do anything." "Not yet," he replied. "But your brother did, and blood remembers. The oath your family swore was not to speak to the dead, not even in love, not even in sorrow. I was saying goodbye." "That's enough." He handed her a bowl of thick black paste. "Rub this on your feet before you sleep. It confuses the trail. It makes the shadow forget which path is yours." She took it with shaking hands. "Will it stop?" Toksamen looked at the swamp. "Not if it's already smiled." That night, she smeared the paste on her soles. It smelled like burnt leaves and copper. She locked the door, lit the candles, held the obsidian close, but no amount of ritual could keep the dread from curling around her spine. She sat against the far wall, facing the spot where the shadow had stood. It didn't appear. Midnight passed. The room stayed empty, and just as her eyelids drooped with exhaustion, something cracked. A soft, splitting sound from under her bed. She bent down slowly, heart beating loud in her ears. There was no shadow, but there were teeth. Small, black, and wet, like baby teeth scattered in a careful line across the wooden floor. The morning sun did not feel like light. It felt like warning. Suri stared at the small row of teeth on the floor beneath her bed, blackened, glistening, too real to be imagined. They didn't belong to her, and they didn't belong to any animal she knew. Each one was shaped like a human's, but smaller, thinner, too sharp at the tip, like milk teeth that had rotted in silence. She swept them into a jar, sealing the lid tight. She didn't tell her mother, not because she wanted to lie, but because her mother had begun to whisper to walls when she thought no one was listening. Suri's world had started to bend, not snap, but bend, slowly, as if reality was softening around the edges, and at the center of that warping was Idris. She walked to the cemetery that evening. The sky had gone the color of rust. Birds were quiet. Leaves moved without wind. She followed the trail through the tall grass, past the old prayer stones, and stopped at her brother's grave. There were no flowers, no offerings, just a cracked marker and a single strand of red thread lying across the dirt, like something had been tied and then untied. Suri knelt, pressing her hand to the earth. "Idris," she whispered. The dirt pulsed once beneath her palm, not movement, but a sensation, like the soil was exhaling beneath her skin. She closed her eyes. "Why are you still here?" And then came a sound, not from above, not from behind, from inside the grave, a low scraping like nails against wood. Suri staggered back, heart hammering. Her breath came fast and sharp, but the grave remained still. The sound faded. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. That night, she returned to Toksamin. She told him about the teeth, about the whispering dirt, about the shadow lagging further now, half a breath behind her every move. He listened in silence. Then he brought out something from an old rusted tin box, a folded cloth stained with dried sap. Inside was a paper charm, browned with age, inscribed with markings she couldn't read. "This belonged to your grandmother," he said. "She was the one who made the oath after the first time." "The first time?" Soli asked, voice barely a whisper. "The first time the toothed shadow came to your bloodline." He lit a candle and placed the charm in her hands. "Your family made a pact. No name spoken after death, no mourning out loud, no grave visits for 7 nights. It was the price of a life spared long ago, a life Idris should have never known about." Suri shook her head, confused. "What do you mean?" Toksamen looked at her then, really looked at her, not with fear, but with regret. "Your brother should have died as a baby. He drowned in the flood that took your father. But your grandmother, she begged the spirits in the swamp, and one answered." He pointed toward the mangroves. "She offered silence, generations of it. No crying, no calling, no remembering. And they gave Idris back, but not completely. Something watched over him ever since, waiting." Suri's throat closed around the scream she didn't let out. "You're saying he was dead? That he wasn't really?" "He was borrowed, and the debt has come due." The shadow had not smiled at her because of what she did. It smiled because it finally recognized her. Blood. He handed her the charm. "Keep this with you. If the shadow lingers beyond the 3rd night, it's no longer your brother's. It becomes yours." She took the charm and left. As she walked home, the wind picked up, but the trees didn't move. The night was too quiet. And then, as she passed the old well near the rice field, she saw something that made her knees buckle. A second shadow. Not hers, not behind her, but standing ahead, waiting. It didn't run, it didn't hide. It only mirrored her steps from a distance. And when she stopped, it didn't. It kept walking toward her, but the feet didn't touch the ground.
The figure moved like a shadow, but it cast none. It walked toward her, slow, deliberate, not with the weight of a body, but with the glide of something mimicking what walking should look like.
Its arms hung just wrong, too long, the elbows bent slightly backward. And as it approached, Suri realized with sickening clarity, it had her shape, her height, her outline, her sway, but not her face. There was no face, just a void where features should have been, a silhouette of skin stretched over nothing, except the mouth. That too wide grin carved where a mouth didn't belong, a rictus smile shaped not from joy, but from the memory of one. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over a root, her breath catching in her throat like a scream frozen before birth. The figure stopped. It tilted its head. Then it mirrored her. But this time it was delayed, a full second. She lifted her hand slowly, heart racing, and after one breath, it did the same. Suri turned and ran, through the rice field, past the swaying grass that whispered as she moved, the figure behind her, not chasing, not lunging, just walking, watching, learning. By the time she reached her home, her knees gave out. She slammed the door behind her, bolted the latch, collapsed on the floor. Her mother wasn't there. The house was empty. Candlelight flickered in the corners. The jar of teeth was gone. The red-threaded obsidian had cracked in two, lying in a smear of dark ash on her pillow. She stayed on the floor for hours, arms around her knees, rocking slowly, whispering old prayers she barely remembered, words her grandmother once taught her, not in the language of worship, but of warning. As dawn broke, the door creaked open. It was her mother. Her eyes were blank, her feet muddy, her shawl soaked in swamp water. She didn't speak. She walked past Suri without looking at her and entered the back room, shutting the door behind her. Suri followed, gently, silently. She found her mother standing in the center of the room, staring at the wall. "What were you doing out there?" Suri asked. Her mother didn't turn. "He followed me, but he wasn't Idris. He wore his shape, but he wasn't my son." Then, without warning, she turned around and her shadow lagged, a beat behind. It smiled. Suri gasped. Her mother blinked. "What is it?" She pointed to the wall, but the shadow had returned to normal. No delay, no smile, nothing wrong. "Nothing," she said. "I thought nothing." That night, she went back to Taksamin's hut, carrying the broken obsidian. He didn't open the door this time. She knocked harder. Then she noticed the smell, like rotting leaves and wet iron. She pushed the door open. The hut was empty. No sign of a struggle, no blood, no footprints. Just his walking stick left in the center of the floor, surrounded by tiny black teeth arranged in a perfect circle. And on the wall, drawn in sap and ash, the symbol from her grandmother's charm, but this time it was upside down, as if someone had taken the protection and turned it into an invitation. She ran from the hut, clutching the broken charm in her fist, her breath fogging the air though the night wasn't cold. She didn't sleep. And when the oil lantern flickered near dawn, she dared to look at the far wall. Her shadow was there, still, waiting. Then it raised its hand and waved. But she hadn't moved. Not this time.
The third night was always the turning point. The elders never said what happened after, only that if your shadow smiled before sunrise on the third night, it would never belong to you
again.
Suri didn't need to hear their warnings anymore. She could feel it, like pressure behind her ribs, something heavy moving when she did not. The sense of being studied, not with eyes, but with memory. Her own movements, learned, repeated, then twisted. All day her shadow stayed in step, perfect, predictable. But the sun was setting now, and Suri was alone. She had tried to tell her mother, but her mother was slipping further into silence. Sometimes she stood at the wall whispering to it, as if it could whisper back. Other times she sat outside the house, eyes closed, chanting to herself in the old dialect that even Suri barely understood. There was no help left, no Toksamin, no village that would listen, and the swamp had begun to hum, a low, constant vibration in the distance, not loud enough to hear, but deep enough to feel in her teeth, like the ground was purring with something ancient and patient. That night, Suri did not light the lantern. She let the darkness fall slowly, steadily, as if it might not notice her if she didn't move. She sat on the wooden floor, knees drawn to her chest, the cracked charm in her lap, whispering every name of God she knew, every protective verse, every childhood promise she remembered. But none of it stopped what came next. Because at exactly midnight, the room became colder. Not cool, cold. And then came the creak of wood, not from the floor, but from the ceiling. She looked up. There was nothing there, but her skin crawled as if something had passed just over her head. Her eyes returned to the wall, and there it was, the shadow. But it was no longer hers. It moved differently now, not delayed but deliberate, not mimicking but performing. It turned its head slowly, unnaturally, as if the neck didn't understand limits. Its arms lifted, but the elbows bent wrong, sharp and angular like broken branches. And its mouth, it had grown, not just wider, longer. The grin reached nearly to its ears, or where its ears would have been. And in the center of that smile, teeth, white, thin, too many. Suri froze. The shadow raised one hand and placed it against the wall, as if trying to push through. The outline of its fingers grew darker, thicker, realer. Then the fingers twitched, not in sync, not as a reflection. They tapped. 1, 2, 3. A rhythm, a message. It knew she was watching. And then it stepped forward. Only slightly. Only enough that its feet no longer aligned with hers. It had separated. She crawled backward until her spine hit the far wall, mouth open, breath shivering. The shadow did not follow. It simply stood, staring with its endless mouth. And then it spoke, not out loud, but through her own lips. A voice rose inside her, not hers, low and wet and too calm. You broke the silence, little one. Now I wear your brother, and soon I wear you. She screamed then, not with sound but with her body. Her whole frame convulsed with terror, the scream lost somewhere in her throat. In that moment, the shadow did something it had never done before. It laughed. No sound came, but the grin widened, the head tilted, the arms stretched slightly, and the wall behind it began to ripple like water. Suri reached for the charm. It sparked in her hand, a heat like fire trapped in paper, and the shadow froze, just for a breath, Then it vanished, like a candle blown out. She collapsed, trembling, the charm smoking in her palm. Outside, the wind had stopped, but the swamp was singing, and somewhere in the dark, something grinned in her shape.
Morning came with no bird song. The sky was colorless, thick with heat and haze, as if the world itself had held its breath overnight and forgotten how to exhale. Suri hadn't slept. Her body had folded into itself in the corner of the room, her back pressed to wood, her fingers still curled around the scorched charm. She didn't remember when she stopped crying. She only remembered the way the shadow had grinned, not just mimicking expression, but owning it. That smile hadn't belonged to her brother, or to her, or to anything born under the sun. It was something else, something that had never needed a name until now, and it had chosen hers. Suri stood slowly, her limbs heavy, her joints aching as if the night had taken something from her. She glanced at the far wall, the one where it had stood. There was a faint mark there now, a thin black stain, the shape of a palm, burned into the wood as if something hot had pressed through from the other side. She didn't touch it. She already knew it would feel cold. Her mother was humming again in the kitchen, the same short melody, 3 notes, over and over, no words, just breath, the same tune she'd been humming since the burial. Suri entered slowly. "Mom?" Her mother didn't turn. "Mom, did you see it last night?" No answer. Suri reached out and gently touched her arm. Her mother stopped humming. Then slowly turned around. Her face was blank, but her shadow was smiling. Suri gasped, stumbling back. Her mother blinked. "What is it, Sayan?" Suri's eyes shot to the floor. The shadow was normal again. No grin, no delay, just a perfect mirror. She shook her head. "Nothing. I didn't sleep." Her mother nodded and placed a bowl of rice in front of her. "Eat. You look pale." But the rice was black, not burnt, not charred, just wrong. She pushed it away. "I'm not hungry." That afternoon she walked to the edge of the mangroves. The sky was still dim, though the sun had risen. The swamp smelled thicker now, sour and sweet like rotting sugar cane. Flies buzzed low to the ground, circling something just beneath the surface of the water. She knelt and peered in. There was a face looking up at her. Not floating, not drowning, just waiting. It was hers, but older, mouth wider, eyes hollow. It didn't blink. She staggered back, heart racing, lungs squeezing air that didn't seem to help. She turned and nearly screamed. A child stood in the path, barefoot, mud-slicked, eyes too wide. Suri recognized her. It was Mira, a girl from the village who had gone missing 3 years ago after wandering too far into the swamp. They'd found her sandals, but never her body. Now she stood in silence, head tilted, arms loose at her sides. "Mira?" Suri whispered. The child said nothing, but her shadow stepped forward. Only the shadow, not the girl. It moved on its own, stretching toward Suri like a tongue. Suri backed away, trembling. "You're not her!" The girl blinked once, then turned and vanished into the reeds. Gone. No footprints, no splash, nothing. Just reeds parting and a grin fading in the dark. That night, Suri stayed awake with every light she could find. The candles, the old lantern, even a string of battery-powered fairy lights she dug from storage. But shadows find a way. Even with light, they live. At 2:07 a.m., the power went out. All of it. Every flame died. Even the batteries drained in seconds. And the room went still. Not dark. Still. Like light had been swallowed, not removed. And in that blackness, she heard it again. A tapping on the wall. And then the voice. Her own voice, but speaking without breath. You smiled today. I saw it. Soon, I'll smile for you. She turned toward the sound. The shadow was no longer on the wall. It was on the ceiling. Above her, mouth open, hands spread, fingers growing longer with each passing second. Then it dropped, not with sound, not with weight, but like a cloth falling. And just before it touched her, she screamed and woke up, alone. The lights were back on. The candles were untouched. But her feet, they were covered in black mud, and a grin was drawn across her mirror in teeth. The mirror no longer showed her face. It showed the idea of a face, something shaped like her but hollowed out, grinning where it shouldn't, and watching with a hunger she couldn't name. Suri stood frozen in front of the mirror, staring at the row of teeth smeared across the glass. Not drawn, not painted, placed. One by one, they were stuck into the reflection. Too many to count, too perfectly spaced to be random. Each tooth blackened, brittle, too sharp for any human mouth. And yet, when she looked closer, they looked familiar. One had a small crack, just like the molar Idris had chipped when they were children. Another was too small, curved inward, a baby tooth she remembered crying over when she lost it. And another was hers. She knew it, because it had a silver filling she'd gotten last year in Johor Bahru. But it was still in her mouth. She could feel it, taste it, couldn't she? She reached up to touch her teeth, fingers trembling, heart thudding in her throat. Her mouth felt whole, but the mirror said otherwise. She grabbed a cloth and wiped the mirror furiously, breathing hard. The teeth didn't smear. They didn't budge. They only grinned wider. Then she saw it. Her reflection behind the glass didn't move with her anymore. It stood still, arms at its sides, mouth curved in a smile. Then, slowly, it lifted a finger and tapped the other side of the glass. Once, twice, 3 times. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, tears stinging her eyes. She turned from the mirror and ran outside into the heavy dusk air, the sky bruised with violet and rust, the sun sinking like a warning. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. The villagers were out, barely. Doors cracked just enough to see her pass. No one waved, no one spoke. Even the dogs no longer barked. She stopped near the old mosque, where the imam sat hunched on the steps, fingers moving silently over his prayer beads. She ran to him. Please, I need help. Something's following me. He didn't look up, didn't blink, only whispered, "You should have stayed silent." She froze. What? He lifted his head. His eyes were cloudy white, and his shadow wasn't his. It was hers. Behind him, stretched along the mosque wall, was a perfect replica of Suri, standing still, head tilted, arms open wide, mouth grinning.
The imam spoke again, but the voice that came from his lips wasn't his own. It was Idris's. "You told me not to call me." Suri backed away slowly, breath trembling, tears breaking free. The imam blinked once and collapsed forward into a prayer, as if nothing had happened. That night she stayed in the living room. She couldn't face the mirror again, couldn't be near any wall. Every time her back was turned, she felt it, the watching, the learning. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a blade of sharpened bone in her hand, one of the teeth from the jar she had hidden weeks ago, the last one she had kept. It pulsed with heat, as if it remembered where it came from. She didn't sleep. She waited, and at exactly 3:03 a.m., the wall rippled. Not the paint, the wood. It folded like breath against cloth, and the shadow stepped out. It was no longer flat. It was no longer mimicking. It was real. It stood in the room with her, tall, sinewy, its skin the texture of soot and smoke, its mouth far too wide, filled with rows of moving teeth that clicked and twitched and shifted like they were hungry for something softer than air. It looked at her, or where her eyes should have been, and smiled. Suri held the bone blade tight. The creature stepped forward, silent as fog, and placed a hand on the wall behind it. Teeth burst through the wood, one by one, forming an arc across the surface. A door, a mouth. The wall was becoming an entrance, a passage. And then the creature did something that froze her blood. It removed its own skin. Not peeled, removed. Like taking off a shirt. It lifted its outer layer, still shaped like Suri, and held it out to her like a gift. A second Suri, empty, waiting. And the real one was beginning to fade. She could feel it, her feet losing weight, her fingers becoming translucent, her breath coming slower, like she was being pulled through her own reflection. The shadow opened its arms, offering her a place inside the body it had crafted from her smile, her movements, her guilt. But Suri wasn't ready to disappear. She screamed with everything inside her and lunged forward, jamming the bone blade into the creature's chest. It didn't bleed, but it staggered, and for the first time, it lost its smile. It hissed, not with breath, but with a tearing sound like old fabric being ripped apart, and collapsed backward into the wall mouth of teeth, vanishing into the mangled grin it had created. The room went still. Her body returned. Weight, breath, heat. But the mirror in the hallway had cracked, and on the shards that lay across the floor, every reflection was still smiling.
The next morning, Suri walked to the edge of the village with shards of mirror in her pocket. Each one still smiled, even now. She didn't know why she brought them. Maybe to prove she wasn't imagining it? Maybe to find someone who could explain what she no longer could? Or maybe just to make sure the grin wasn't hers. There was one person left in the village who might understand. Makatima, the old healer. She lived beyond the rice paddies in a crooked wooden house guarded by banana trees and incense smoke that never stopped drifting. The villagers whispered that she was blind. Others said she saw too much. Suri had only met her once, as a child, when she was sick with fever and her mother brought her for blessing. The woman had placed both hands over her eyes and whispered something in a language older than Malay. By morning, the fever was gone. Now, Suri needed more than healing. She needed answers. The path to Makatima's house was lined with offerings, bundles of leaves, feathers, and wax-sealed jars. None had names. None had been touched. It felt like walking through a forest of forgotten prayers. She knocked once. The door opened before she could knock again. Makatima stood barefoot in the threshold, wrapped in a batik shawl that hung like shadows. Her eyes were milk white, clouded and still, but somehow saw everything. "You've been touched," she said softly, "but not by death." Suri didn't speak. She only opened her hand, revealing the broken mirror shard and its grin. Makatima didn't flinch. She reached forward and closed Suri's fingers over it. "Keep that covered. It feeds on being seen." Suri's voice cracked. "What is it?" Makatima turned and walked into the house. "Come, before the wind changes." Inside, the walls were covered in cloth. Not pictures, not mirrors, not a single reflection. Dozens of charms hung from the ceiling like forgotten dreams. Teeth, stones, rusted keys, all wrapped in red thread. Makatima sat by a basin of dark water. "Tell me." So Suri did. The shadow, the smile, the delay, the way it stepped out of the wall like it had always lived behind her. When she finished, Makatima's silence was long, heavy. Then she dipped her fingers into the basin and stirred. The water didn't ripple. It shrank, pulling inward as if something beneath the surface had inhaled. Makatima leaned close. "Do you know what a shadow is?" Suri nodded. It's the shape you cast when light hits you?" "No," Makatima said. "That is what we see. A true shadow is what you cast into the spirit world. It is how they see you." She pointed to the basin. "The Bayang Gigi does not live in your world. It lives in the one behind it, and it has worn your shape for too long." Suri's throat dried. "Can it be stopped?" Makatima hesitated. "Not once it smiles." Suri looked down. Her hands were trembling. "Then what do I do?" Makatima stood and went to a carved wooden box tucked behind a curtain. From inside, she pulled a thin blade carved from bone. Not human, not animal, but something in between. It was covered in symbols Suri couldn't read. "You must sever it," she whispered, "at the root." "How?" Makatima pointed to the shard still clutched in Suri's hand. "You must walk where it lives, not here, not in mirrors, but in the place beyond, where shadows walk alone." She poured something into the basin, black ash, a drop of her own blood. The water turned solid, and then it cracked. Beneath the surface, Suri saw something move, her own reflection, but older, worn, and smiling. Makatima placed the bone blade in her palm. "When it smiles with your face, you must not scream, you must cut, or it will wear you forever." Suri looked into the healer's eyes. "What happens if I fail?" Makatima closed her milky eyes. "Then your shadow will return to the world, but you won't." Suri nodded, throat tight. She turned to leave, blade in hand, mirror shard wrapped in cloth. But as she stepped outside,
she noticed something strange. Makatima's shadow wasn't moving. The old woman stood still inside, but her shadow on the floor waved slowly. Once, twice, 3 times. Suri didn't say a word. She just walked faster. And behind her, as the trees whispered and the incense burned low, the grin followed.
The path to the swamp was older than the village. It began behind the prayer stones and wound between tangled roots and crooked palms, dipping into the silence like a blade into still water. No one walked it after dark. Even the birds refused to sing near its edges. But Suri walked it now. Just past sunset, bone blade wrapped in cloth, mirror shard tied beneath her shawl. The wind had stopped following her. The air hung thick, unmoving, as if the world had paused to watch. She could feel it, the smile waiting. The mangroves rose ahead, dark and wet and impossibly still, their roots reaching from the earth like hands frozen in prayer. The swamp smelled of salt and rot and something deeper, something that had no scent, only memory. She stepped onto the wooden path that cut across the water. Each step creaked underfoot. Each breath came thinner than the last. And then she saw it. A shrine, half sunken near the center of the swamp, made of stone and bone and bamboo, wrapped in red thread and feather charms. A place the elders never spoke of. A place where names were once whispered into the water in exchange for something precious. Something like a heartbeat returned. Something like a child pulled from death. The water around the shrine was black, not with mud, but with depth. A darkness that had weight, as if it remembered how to drown the things it had once saved. Suri knelt near the edge, gripping the blade. "I know what you are," she whispered. The water did not answer, but her reflection did. It rose slowly, not from above, but from beneath, a shadow drifting toward the surface of the swamp like it was returning home. It had her face, her hair, her eyes, but its mouth had changed. There were no lips, just a grin stretched wide and stitched to the edges of the jaw. Then it spoke, not in her voice, but in her grandmother's. "You broke the silence, little one. You spoke to what was borrowed. You mourned what was not yours." Suri trembled. "You made the deal. You swore the oath, and now it's taken Idris." The shadow laughed, a soundless ripple across the water. "It hasn't taken him. It is him. Just like one day, it will be you." Then the surface broke. The shadow stepped onto the wooden path, wet, tall, real. Its skin no longer smoke, its shape no longer fluid. It was her, finished, a mirror perfected in grief. It walked toward her slowly, grinning. "Do you know what it means to be chosen?" it asked. Suri backed away, blade shaking in her hand. "It means you are loved, so much that even death cannot forget your name." It raised its arms, and dozens of shadows rose from the mangroves behind it. Children, mothers, old men, all smiling, all hollow, all shaped like someone she had once known, all wearing the skin of memory. Suri screamed and swung the blade, slicing the air in front of her. The lead shadow stepped back, its smile twitching, but not breaking. "You cannot cut me here. This is my root. This is where you came from. Suri looked around. The swamp, the shrine, the water that had given her brother back. This wasn't where the curse had started. This was where it had been fed. She dropped to her knees and plunged the blade into the wooden path, not at the shadow, but at her own feet. And she spoke aloud the name her grandmother had forbidden. Siti Rama binti Iskandar. The swamp trembled. The water surged. The shrine cracked. The shadows hissed, loud and sharp, like wind over broken teeth. Suri kept speaking. You made the pact. You gave a child in exchange for silence, but I am not yours to keep. The shadow stepped back. Its grin faltered. You broke the chain. You broke the bloodline silence. Suri rose and smiled, not like it, not wide, not monstrous, but small, human. I was never meant to be quiet. Then she slashed the blade across her palm and let the blood fall into the swamp. The surface sizzled. The shadows screamed, folding inward, shrinking back, and the reflection in the water began to blur. The grin melted. Her shadow twisted, writhing like a snake caught in fire. And then, with a single deafening crack, the shrine collapsed into the swamp, swallowed whole. The silence returned. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of something finished, something gone. Suri stood alone on the broken path, her hand bleeding, her breath calm. And for the first time in days, her shadow followed her without delay. No lag, no grin, just her.
The swamp was behind her, but the silence followed. Suri walked back through the village like a ghost in her own story. Her feet left prints on the path, but no one noticed. No curtains moved, no doors creaked, not even the roosters crowed. It was as if the whole world had stepped back, waiting to see what she would become. By the time she reached her house, the blood from her hand had dried, dark and flaking across her fingers. The bone blade hung from her belt in a cloth pouch. The mirror shard was still wrapped in her shawl. But the house felt different, lighter, as though something had been lifted from its beams. She pushed the door open slowly. The lights were off. The air was cool. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming again, but this time the melody was softer, slower. It no longer circled like a chant. It wandered. "Mum?" Suri said gently. Her mother turned and smiled, a tired, human smile. Suri's breath caught. "Are you all right?" Her mother blinked, confused. "Why wouldn't I be?" Suri stepped forward carefully, watching her shadow. It followed. No grin, no twitch. Her mother returned to stirring the pot on the stove. "You look pale, Sayang." "I've been walking to the swamp." Her mother didn't flinch. She didn't ask why. She just nodded slowly and whispered, "Your grandmother used to go there too, before she learned what silence really cost." Then she said nothing else. That night, Suri cleaned the wound on her palm and bandaged it with cloth soaked in salt water and turmeric. She sat in front of the old mirror, the one still cracked from the last time she saw the smile. But now, the glass was empty. Just her. Tired eyes, hollow cheeks, but hers. She touched her reflection. It moved with her. No delay, no trick. She exhaled, and then she noticed something strange. A folded piece of cloth left neatly on her bed.
She didn't remember placing it there. She opened it. It was skin. Not fresh, not bleeding, but soft, pale, empty. It was her skin. Or it looked like it. But the stitching was wrong. Too perfect. No pores, no blemishes, no scars, like it had been copied from memory, not grown. She recoiled, heart racing. And inside the folds, a single note, written in her own handwriting. "You left this behind." She dropped it, ran to the basin and splashed her face, desperate to feel something real. But when she looked up, the mirror no longer reflected her body, only her eyes, suspended in black, watching. She stumbled back, breathing hard. The floorboards beneath her feet groaned. And then she remembered. The shadow had taken off its skin. It had offered it to her. Had she stepped out of herself? Had she come back? Or had something else come in? She sat down, trembling, trying to steady her breath. Then she noticed her fingers. The fingerprints were gone. Just smooth skin, flat, blank. Her voice cracked in the stillness. "No, no, I cut the root. I ended it." But the voice in the mirror answered calmly. "You severed the curse, but not the cost." A chill crept up her spine, the kind that doesn't come from wind, the kind that lives inside. She turned to grab the bone blade, but it was gone. So was the cloth that wrapped it. And on the wall, scratched into the wood with something sharp, were 5 words. "You are wearing the wrong skin."
She didn't sleep that night. Sleep belonged to people whose bodies were still fully theirs. Siri sat on the floor of her room, bare feet pressed against the wooden boards, staring at the place where the writing had appeared. "You are wearing the wrong skin." The words were no longer there, but she remembered each curve of the letters, each cut, like they had been etched into her memory instead of the wall. She pressed her fingers together, thumb to fingertip, trying to feel the old ridges of her prints. Nothing, just smoothness, like paper that had been wiped clean. She was losing herself in pieces, not all at once, but slowly, deliberately, as if something wanted her to watch the erasure. She thought of Maktima, of the blade now missing, of the shadows that had receded into the swamp, but not into silence. She thought of her brother and what he had become. She closed her eyes and whispered his name. Idris. The room shifted. The silence thickened, not louder, but denser, like breath you couldn't exhale. And the candle in the far corner flickered without wind. Then came a sound, not from the window, not from the walls, from inside her. A single breath, but not hers. And with it, a voice, quiet, familiar, trembling. Idris. Her eyes opened. The mirror showed nothing, but the reflection of the candlelight moved. It leaned, it bent, as if something invisible were casting a shape just beyond her vision. She reached into her pocket, fingers shaking, and pulled out the small cloth-wrapped shard of mirror she had taken from her grandmother's prayer cabinet long ago, a shard forbidden even to look into. It had been hidden for years, a piece of a larger mirror shattered during a storm the day after her grandfather died. Her grandmother had said it was cursed, that when people prayed in front of it, they heard answers they were never meant to hear, answers that smiled back. She had never understood what that meant until now. Siri held the shard up slowly, angling it toward the open air in front of her.
At first, nothing, just dust, light. Then, the shape appeared, a faint outline, like smoke, like her brother. Not Idris as he died, Idris as he had almost been, the way he looked before the river took him, before the silence, before the swamp. He was standing there, or something wearing his shape was. His mouth moved, but no sound came from the room, only from inside her head. You prayed. You broke the silence again. Tears welled in her eyes. I wanted to help you. You did. Now I can come closer. And he did, step by step, until the edge of his face touched the edge of the shard. She could see him only in that sliver of glass, not in the room, not in her eyes, only there. You don't understand what you've opened, he said. Siri swallowed hard. Then tell me. Idris smiled, but not the wide, grinning smile of the shadow. A sad smile, the kind that came right before goodbye. There is a prayer, the one grandmother never taught us, the one meant to close the door. Siri nodded. Say it. He shook his head. I can't. You have to remember it. How? His smile faded. You already heard it. The night she died, she said it in her sleep. Siri's breath caught. She had heard something once, muffled words, spoken just before dawn, her grandmother twisting under the mosquito net, eyes closed, mouth trembling. She thought it was a dream, a soft chant, 7 words, but in a dialect she never understood. And yet now, she did. She didn't know how, but she remembered. She spoke them out loud, slow, careful, tasting each syllable like it had been hidden on her tongue. The air around her twisted. The mirror shard burned in her hand. Idris's shape began to flicker, and he smiled again. That's it. Then his voice changed, lower, rougher. Wrong. That's it. The grin returned. Not Idris. Not even close. The reflection peeled apart, teeth, black eyes, too many limbs, and it reached through the shard, only an inch, but enough to scrape its nail across her cheek. Blood ran down her face, and the shard shattered. Gone. She screamed and fell backward, the floor catching her in a hard thud, her breath ripped from her lungs. And then, nothing. Just the candle, still burning, as if nothing had happened. But when she reached up to touch her cheek, there was no blood, only a scar in the shape of a smile.
The mirror was crying, not weeping like a person, but leaking. Droplets rolled down the surface of the glass long after the shard had shattered. Not condensation, not water, something thicker, viscous, dark, like oil and memory mixed together, slowly bleeding from the edges of her reflection. Suri stood frozen, staring at her face behind the pane. Except it wasn't her face anymore. It was her skin, wearing her face. The scar beneath her cheekbone had deepened overnight, curling at the edges like a smile, too shy to fully bloom. It didn't hurt, but it pulsed. A quiet throb that beat against her jaw in rhythm with a breath she hadn't taken. She stepped away from the mirror. It kept watching. The tears continued, slow, steady, as though something inside the reflection was mourning what it had become. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, but she was wide awake. And the house felt colder now, even in the morning light. Her mother sat by the window,
eyes staring at the horizon, unmoving, not asleep, not conscious, just waiting.
"Mom?"
Suri whispered. No answer. The woman's lips moved, but no words came, only a sound, like humming, but reversed, a melody moving backward through time. Suri stepped closer and saw her mother's shadow stretch toward her, curling at the edges, flickering like it wasn't quite sure how to remain whole. Then she blinked, and it snapped back into place, as if nothing had ever happened. She backed away slowly. Her mother never turned her head. Suri left the house. The village was still, not empty, but still, like everything had been paused between breaths. She walked toward the old mosque again, unsure why. The bone blade was gone, the charm burned, the mirror shattered. But something inside her, something not yet erased, told her that faith was the one thing it could not mimic. As she reached the mosque's threshold, she noticed something strange. The windows were weeping. Thin trails of black streaked down the panes. Inside, the prayer mats had been turned upside down. The ceiling fan spun slowly, though there was no power. And on the far wall, where the calligraphy once read, "Allah is light," was a smear, a dripping, tooth-shaped smear. She knelt where she remembered kneeling as a child, folded her hands, closed her eyes, and spoke nothing. No prayer, no plea, only silence. Because now she understood. Words gave it form, names gave it shape, attention gave it hunger, but silence starved it. She stayed there for hours, breathing slowly, letting her mind unravel the web the shadow had spun around her. And when she finally stood, when the numbness in her legs faded, the mosque was still and dry. No more streaks, no more teeth, just light. Outside, dusk had already begun to settle. She walked home with the kind of calm that comes after grief, not peace, but understanding. When she entered her room, the mirror was clear. No tears, no smile, just her. And yet, as she turned to change her clothes, something brushed against her spine. She froze, lifted her shirt. There, between her shoulder blades, was an outline, faint, familiar. A crack running down her back, shaped like a parting seam. A line, like someone had once unzipped her and stitched her back together. She stumbled backward, reaching for the wall to steady herself, and the mirror, now clean, caught her movement. But her reflection didn't follow. It stayed still, eyes forward, mouth closed. Then it blinked, only once, but not with her. She whispered, trembling, "What are you?" And the reflection answered, mouth not moving, not a sound, but her voice still echoed in the room. "I am what you made space for." She smashed the mirror. Glass burst outward in a rain of shards. She cut her hand. Her palm burned. She welcomed the pain. But as the pieces settled, each one showed her face, and in every single shard, she was smiling. The mirror was gone, but the smiles remained. Suri swept the broken shards into a clay bowl, every piece reflecting a version of herself she no longer trusted. She buried them behind the house, deep beneath a banana tree, marking the spot with a single stone and a whispered breath. When she returned inside, her mother was humming again, that same backwards melody, only now slower, like it had forgotten how to end. Suri stood in the doorway and asked quietly, "Do you remember when Idris came back?" Her mother didn't answer. But her shadow stretched too far, and it smiled. That was enough. Suri left the house and went to the school. It had been abandoned for months, ever since the teacher vanished during a lesson. The children claimed she'd walked into the blackboard during morning prayer and never walked back out. The elders had boarded up the doors. The windows were covered in bamboo and red thread. But Suri knew where the loose plank was. She pulled it back and stepped inside. The air smelled like chalk and mildew. The alphabet posters had yellowed with moisture. Tiny desks sat in neat rows, too perfect for a building no one dared to enter. And in the far corner, behind the teacher's chair, were drawings. Hundreds of them, taped to the wall, layered over each other. Each one showed a person, a face, a smile. But the smiles were too wide, the arms too long, the eyes always empty. Some were labeled with names: Maktima, Pak Imam, Chegu Laila. Some were just labeled Mother. And some were blank. But the face drawn was unmistakably hers. She stepped closer, heart racing. One of the drawings was newer, colored in with red pencil, too vivid for an old paper. It showed her standing at the edge of the swamp, her reflection smiling, while her real self cried. Suri turned quickly and found a child standing in the corner, barefoot, mud-stained, holding another drawing. "Mira," Suri whispered. The girl blinked, then held out the page. This one showed Idris, but he was smiling in both the reflection and the real world, and behind him was something coming out of his shadow. Mira didn't speak. She just whispered one word. "Shh." Suri knelt. "Do you know what it is?" The child nodded slowly. "It's what comes when you love the dead too loud." Suri's breath caught. Mira turned her eyes toward the ceiling. "We used to see it during story time. When the teacher read too slow, it would crawl down the wall." "Where is it now?" Suri asked. The child pointed toward the window. "It's in the glass. It lives between the blink and the breath." Then she stepped back into the dark and disappeared, not like a ghost, but like someone who had never really been here at all. Suri left the school in silence. The drawings still pressed against her memory. Children had seen it before the elders did, because children listen differently. They feel what grown-ups ignore. They see what adults call make-believe. She returned home as the sun dipped low. The wind was rising again. The swamp had begun to breathe. And that night, when Suri walked past her mother's room, she heard her speaking in a voice not hers, reciting something, again and again. 7 words. The same 7 Suri had spoken the night the mirror cracked. Only now, backwards. She stepped into the room and froze. The mirror on the wall, one she didn't remember owning, had returned, unbroken. And in its glass, 2 women stood. But only one was moving. Her mother turned slowly, lips stretched in a grin, and her voice, or something's voice, whispered, "The children knew, but you waited too long." Suri stepped back, heart pounding. Her mother's shadow detached and walked toward her.
The shadow walked without footsteps. It slid toward Suri like smoke with a purpose, trailing behind her mother, but no longer of her mother. It was no longer pretending to be human. It had no need to, because now it was recognized. Suri stood still, feet cold against the floorboards, her body frozen, not by fear, but by memory. She remembered the night her brother died, not the funeral, not the grave, the night before, when Idris had come into her room, face pale, eyes wild, his voice a whisper barely stitched together. He had said, "Don't let them close my eyes." She hadn't understood. Not then, but now she did. Because the thing that mimics you waits until no one is watching, and the moment your eyes close, it slips in. It pulls on your grief like a coat, and it wears you. The shadow stopped inches from her, stretching long and thin against the wall. It didn't attack, it didn't move. It only opened its mouth, a wide, trembling line of nothing. Suri stepped backward, breath sharp in her throat. But her mother, or the thing inside her, spoke instead. "You keep calling him back," it said. "You keep mourning. You keep remembering. That's how we stay." Suri shook her head. "I let him go." "No," the voice hissed. "You called him. You named him. You loved him so loudly we found the way back." She turned to the mirror on the wall, the one she didn't own, the one that hadn't been there yesterday, and saw her reflection start to drip. Not tears, not blood, but pieces, tiny flecks of skin and light and memory, slipping from the surface like sand falling upward. She felt her knees go weak. The house groaned. The air pressed inward. Grief was folding her in half, because somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the horror, beneath the curse, was still love. Love for Idris, the boy who plucked flowers and told stories and promised never to leave her behind. She sank to the floor. The shadow knelt with her, not to comfort, but to watch, to learn. And in that moment, Suri understood why it chose her. It wasn't because she was weak. It was because she felt too much. And that made her easy to mimic. She looked up at the figure in front of her, now fully formed, its body her shape, its voice her breath, its eyes mirrors of loss. It smiled and said, "Let me stay." Suri reached into her pocket and found nothing. No blade, no charm, only the smallest object she didn't remember placing there. A button, black, cold, from Idris's old school shirt. She held it tight. She said, "I miss him." The shadow leaned forward. "We know." And in that second, she felt it. Not possession, but permission. She had invited it in. Every time she remembered, every time she spoke his name, every time she cried alone in the dark. That's how it came through. Tethered by grief, fed by it. It didn't steal her. She gave it the door. And now, she had to close it. Not with hate, not with fire, but with goodbye. She closed her eyes, breathed deep, and whispered, not to the shadow, not to the thing, but to the brother she had loved, "I release you." The house shook. The windows cracked. The mirror shattered again, not violently, but like ice melting too fast. And the shadow gasped, a soft, wet sound, like drowning,
It reached for her, trembling, fading, desperate. But Suri kept her eyes closed. "I release you," she repeated, "and I forgive you for leaving." The figure howled, and this time it did not sound like Idris. It sounded ancient, rooted, pulled from the mangroves and bone and memory of the land. Then silence. Real silence. No wind, no breath, no hum. When Suri opened her eyes, the shadow was gone. Her mother lay sleeping on the floor, and in the corner of the room, the mirror had turned black. Its surface no longer reflective, just a dark wall, closed. And for the first time in days, her own shadow stood beside her, still, normal, silent. And hers.
The floorboards had always creaked, but now they whispered. Suri walked slowly across the house that had finally quieted, listening to the old wood groan beneath her weight. The silence after the storm should have felt like peace, but it didn't. It felt like breath held too long. Her mother was resting in bed, eyes closed, hands folded neatly over her stomach. She hadn't spoken since the shadow vanished, but her color was returning. Her skin was warm, her breathing steady. Still, Suri couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from below. The floors had always been familiar, safe, worn by years of footsteps, of laughter, of quiet arguments in the morning. But now, when she stepped on certain planks, she felt the faintest give. Not like old wood, like something waiting. That night, she chose to sleep in the living room. With the lantern burning beside her and her back pressed firmly against the wall, she lay down on a mat woven by her grandmother years ago. The fabric still smelled of lemongrass and incense, faint echoes of ritual and protection. She wrapped herself in silence. But just past midnight, the warmth drained from the floor beneath her. Her eyes snapped open, the lantern flickered, and something moved under the mat. Not loudly, soft, careful, like a breath exhaled through cracks. She sat up slowly, pulled the mat aside. The wood underneath was damp, and at the very center, between the floorboards, was a hairline gap, thin but unmistakable. She leaned closer. Something was smiling up at her. Not a face, not a shadow, a shape. A curve of teeth pressed against the underside of the floor, as if something was lying there on its back, grinning toward the ceiling. Suri scrambled away, heart pounding, breath wild in her throat. The lantern went out. The room fell into thick, suffocating dark, but the smile remained. She couldn't see it, but she felt it, right beneath her feet. She grabbed a broomstick and jabbed at the floor hard, over and over, but nothing broke through. Only the sound of something laughing from beneath, muffled, wet, amused. She ran to the bedroom. Her mother stirred. "What is it?" Suri couldn't answer, because how do you explain that grief had a mouth, that it lived under your floor, that no matter how much you forgave, part of it stayed? Her mother sat up, her eyes wide. "You found the root, didn't you?" Suri blinked. "What?" "The smile, under the house. That's where they buried it." Suri's voice cracked. "Who?" "Your grandmother, and the others, the women. After the first child was taken, they tried to trap it in the dark." Suri's throat dried. "How?" "They couldn't kill it, but they could feed it, bind it with grief, let it live beneath the house, between the foundation and the soil, where no light could reach." "Why didn't anyone tell me?"
Her mother's eyes filled with tears, because to name it is to wake it, and it was sleeping until Idris died. Suri stepped back toward the door. She could feel it again, the warmth in the boards fading, the grin rising. It had her scent, her name, her sadness. It was no longer waiting for a body. It was becoming the house. The walls curved slightly inward. The windows began to fog. The air filled with that old smell, not rot, but memory, the scent of the funeral, the same salt-heavy wind from the swamp. The smile beneath her feet began to push upward, warping the floor, bending the boards, and then from below came a sound, knocking, slow, steady, from inside the foundation, as if to be let in. Suri dropped to her knees, pressed her palm flat to the floor, and felt the heartbeat. Not hers, not human, just rhythm, teeth grinding in the wood.
The knocking didn't stop. 3 slow thuds every few minutes, as if the thing beneath the floor wasn't trying to break in, but trying to talk. Suri sat cross-legged on the mat, staring at the wood, her ears straining to hear what her mind told her couldn't be real. Her mother had gone quiet again, resting behind a closed door, as though sleep could protect her from the echoing hum below. But Suri knew now it didn't want her mother. It wanted her. The girl who mourned too loud, the girl who remembered too well, the one who fed it with every whispered "I miss you" that passed her lips. And now it had learned to answer. The knocking changed. Not louder, clearer. It formed rhythm, pattern, then words. She didn't hear them with her ears. She felt them in her bones. "Let me wear you again." She stood, heart pounding, hands clenched into fists. "No," she whispered. The shadow on the wall twitched. It didn't belong to her. It moved just a fraction behind her own motion, like a dog waiting for command. She stepped away from it. It lagged. But now it was no longer shaped like her. Its legs were too long. Its arms were jointed the wrong way. Its mouth still stretched, always smiling. Suri reached for the only thing left from Maktima, a packet of dried herbs and ground charcoal tied with red string, hidden under the prayer mat. The healer had given it to her weeks ago, saying only, "If it learns to speak, don't answer. Burn this." She lit the stove. The herbs hissed when fire kissed them. Smoke poured out in ribbons, not gray, but deep green, heavy with bitterness and memory. The scent filled the house, pushing against the walls, crawling under the floorboards. The knocking stopped. So did the grin. The shadow flickered, then spoke, not aloud, not even in her thoughts. It used her voice, her own voice. From the center of the smoke, she heard herself say, "It's too late. You already wore me." She staggered back. The floor trembled. Then something began to rise, not from beneath, but from within the walls. Figures, tall, slender, skin like soot, eyes like lanterns, but dimmer. They emerged from every corner of the room, each one shaped like a person she used to know. An aunt, a friend, a child from school, Idris. But they were only versions of them, shadows wearing memories. The room was full of smiles that didn't mean joy, only hunger. Suri held her ground. "You don't belong here."
The figure shaped like Idris stepped forward. Its voice was velvet. "You made us belong." It raised its arm, and every shadow in the room mirrored it in perfect delay, like a choir of motion. "Every prayer to the dead is an invitation. Every tear is a door. You cried for us, and we came." Suri shook her head. "I didn't know." "But you felt, and that's enough." She stumbled backward, hand reaching for the smoking bundle. But the figure grinned wider and whispered, "That won't work anymore." The smoke vanished, gone, sucked into the walls like breath returning to lungs. The room fell silent, still. Then the shadow stepped forward and knelt, not to worship, to plead. Its grin disappeared, and in a voice barely human, it whispered, "Let me stay. Let me have a name again." Suri hesitated, because beneath the horror, there was something sad in that voice, a loneliness deeper than grief, something old and abandoned, surviving off scraps of love. She almost answered, but then the floor beneath her split, just slightly. A single board lifted, and beneath it, the mouth waited. Not metaphor, not memory, a mouth made of shadow and bone and need. The smile stretched across the underside of the house. It whispered, "Speak the name, and I will wear you clean." She looked into that endless grin and saw herself, hollow, happy, gone. And for the first time in her life, she didn't answer. She stepped back, closed her lips, and offered only silence. The shadows hissed, shrank, vanished. The floor settled, the wall grew still, and her own shadow, her real one, returned to her feet, waiting, silent, finally hers again.
They had always said the oath was meant to protect, but they never said what it was really protecting them from. Suri stood at the edge of the mangroves again, where the swamp met the bones of the village. The wind stirred only in circles here. The air didn't move forward, it looped. Carried whispers that had no mouths, names that no one dared speak anymore. In her hands, she held what was left of her grandmother's prayer book, its pages worn thin, some half-burned at the edges. It had taken her hours to find it, tucked beneath the old rice bin in the back shed, wrapped in black cloth and string. There, scrawled in the final pages in fading ink, was the truth no one had passed down. The oath was not silence, it was surrender. Her family hadn't vowed to keep quiet. They had vowed to keep feeding it. With silence, with sorrow, with skin. Each generation mourning a little too long. Each mother warning a little too late. Each child growing up afraid of mirrors and not knowing why. She read the final line of the journal aloud. "When the smile begins to learn your steps, walk backward into the dark and make no sound. That is how we bought our time. That is how we gave it a face." Suri felt her blood go cold. The curse hadn't been a punishment. It had been a trade. They had allowed the spirit to take one, so it wouldn't take everyone. Idris had been the cost, and now it wanted more. She closed the book and stood. Behind her the swamp rippled, though there was no wind. She took one slow step into the water, then another. The surface was warmer than it should have been, as if the swamp remembered her or had been waiting. Suri stopped when the water reached her knees. The mud pulled gently at her feet, not to drown, but to welcome. Then she spoke. Not a prayer, not a curse, but something in between. The 7 words again, this time not as a plea, but as a command. Words her grandmother had whispered in fear. Words Suri now spoke in defiance. As she finished, the air stilled. The reeds bowed outward, and the water parted slightly before her, just enough for a face to rise. It was hers, again, but older, cracked, lined with 1,000 smiles it had worn before. The spirit of the Bayang Gigi no longer pretended. It no longer needed her brother's voice. It had its own now, a voice like wood splitting under weight. You undo what has fed me, it said. Suri met its gaze. I reverse the oath. The spirit smiled, lips folding open like paper burned too long. You cannot reverse what your blood agreed to. I am my blood, but I am not my silence. She took the final page from the prayer book, lit a match, and dropped it into the swamp. The flames didn't die, they spread, not across water, across reflection. The burning image of the page rippled across the surface like oil catching light, setting fire to every mirrored face, every silent promise ever made beneath the trees. The spirit screamed, not in anger, in hunger. A starvation it had never known, because the chain had been broken, the silence undone, and the name it wore was being forgotten. Its face began to blur, its mouth folded inward, the teeth dissolved into mist. It reached forward, a last desperate attempt, and whispered, "Please, don't let me go." But Suri stepped backward onto the dry earth and answered gently, "You are not mine to hold." The water collapsed inward, the reflection vanished, the air cleared, and the mangroves exhaled. For the first time in generations, the swamp felt empty, not cursed, not haunted, just quiet.
Some things do not die, they wait. Suri walked back from the swamp with her feet soaked in memory, but the water didn't cling like before. It let her go. The heat had lifted. The wind moved in straight lines again. Even the mangroves no longer whispered her name. But peace is never whole, and some echoes don't fade. She returned home in the blue hush of evening, expecting the house to feel lighter, but it didn't. It felt hollow, like something had been pulled out and the air hadn't decided what to fill the space with yet. Her mother sat on the porch, sewing by candlelight, hands steady. She didn't look up when Suri approached, but her lips moved with something familiar, a quiet prayer, steady and private. It made Suri pause. "Mom," she whispered, "is it over?" Her mother looked up, eyes soft but unreadable. "Nothing's ever over, Sayang. Some things just lose their voice for a while." Suri sat beside her, both of them quiet, the candle between them flickering without reason. That night, she went to her room and opened the cupboard where the mirror had once hung. Empty. No reflections. No shards. Only the scent of old wood and ash. She pulled out her old school uniform from the bottom drawer, folded neatly, worn once for a funeral. The button that had vanished days ago, the one from Idris's shirt, was sewn back in place. But it was wrong. Wrong thread,
wrong hole. And it smiled. Not physically, but she felt it watching her from the seam. She tossed the shirt aside and backed away, breath quickening. Not again. Please, not again. She ran to the kitchen, opened every drawer, every cabinet, searching for something, salt, charm, fire, anything. And then she heard it, from the walls, a low sound, like breathing, but only from the mouth. No nose, no lungs, just breath dragged between teeth. She turned slowly. The shadows on the walls had multiplied. Not hers, not anyone's, just floating there, disconnected from bodies, silent but smiling. She covered her mouth, trying not to cry, because she realized now the spirit had not needed her name. It only needed her grief. And grief doesn't die in a swamp. Grief settles in bone, in floorboards, in fabric, in memory. And it comes back when you forget how to carry it quietly. One of the shadows twitched, then another. They leaned forward, mouths wide, but still, frozen open. Mouths that don't close, as if they had been caught mid-scream and never stopped. Suri collapsed to her knees, clutching her ears as the silence became deafening. Not noise, silence so loud it scraped against her thoughts. And then the laughter started. Not hers, not one voice. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Children, women, the dead, the almost dead. All laughing with mouths open too wide, not out of joy, but because they could no longer close them. Suri stood, staggered, ran outside barefoot. The air felt normal. The village looked unchanged, but every house had its windows open, and every window had a shadow inside, staring, smiling, waiting. Suri dropped to the dirt and screamed, not for help, for release. Because she understood now, you don't escape grief. You wear it. And if you wear it too long, it starts to stretch, until it no longer fits your skin, until something else slips inside. And then, the mouth never closes again.
It was no longer just a shadow. It had weight now. It had breath. And it had begun to walk where she walked, not behind her, not beside her, but inside her steps. Suri wandered the edge of the village like a thread unraveling. Her skin still moved with her, but it didn't feel like hers anymore. It felt borrowed, loose around the joints, like it remembered too many faces that weren't her own. Everyone she passed had begun to smile too long. People who used to nod in silence now grinned with lips stretched thin, teeth clenched just a bit too tightly, heads tilted at angles that didn't belong in polite conversation. And worse, they didn't blink. Their shadows lagged just slightly, as if forgetting who they belonged to. The curse hadn't ended. It had spread. Not through mirrors, not through names, but through mourning. The grief had been too loud, too deep, and now the thing that had lived beneath the floorboards of her home had moved into theirs. She reached Toxamine's abandoned hut near the tree line, hoping for an answer, but all she found was the smell, the scent of something rotting slowly, without urgency. Inside, the walls were covered in cloth charms, all turned inward, not to protect, to trap. In the center of the room was a single object, her childhood doll, sewn from cloth,
stuffed with ashes, wearing her face. Suri dropped it and stepped back, but something rose from behind the curtain, a figure, her size, her frame, her voice. It stepped into the light and wore her body perfectly, but its smile never faded. "I've followed long enough," it whispered. "I know how to walk like you now." Suri ran, out the door, into the forest, not stopping until her breath turned to fire. But the thing didn't chase her. It didn't need to, because it had her body. It had her movements, and slowly it would have her place. She collapsed beneath a tree near the mangrove's edge, tears spilling into the dirt, and for a moment, silence. Then, footsteps. She looked up, but nothing was there, until she looked behind her and saw her own footprints walking forward, alone, pressed into the mud, one after another, as if an invisible body was moving without her. The body that followed, it had broken free, no longer tethered to her voice, her reflection, her grief. It had learned, it had waited, and now it walked. The swamp water behind her began to ripple. From its surface rose another her, then another, and another. All her, all possible versions that had been imagined, mourned, wished for, or feared. Suri screamed, but the sound never reached the air. One of the bodies turned toward her and smiled and spoke. "You are the echo. We are the voice." Then they walked toward her, barefoot, silent, step by step, and the dirt beneath her feet began to soften, because the body that followed didn't need her to run. It needed her to stand still.
There is a moment, just before surrender, where the soul asks one last question. Am I still me? Suri stood barefoot in the swamp light, surrounded by herself. Versions that had never existed, reflections of grief given shape, memories mistaken for mirrors, possibilities worn like skin. And at the center of it all, one truth pulsed beneath her feet. She was never the only one who mourned, but she was the one who fed it. Each tear, each whisper, each name spoken into the dark had been a gift. And the thing that followed her, smiled through her, learned from her, had never needed to chase. It only needed to be chosen. The echoes stepped closer now, silent and sure, their shadows detaching from their feet and dragging behind them like hungry nets. The wind stopped moving. The swamp held its breath, and Suri finally understood. You don't cast this shadow. It casts you. It waits beneath your skin, quiet and still, until you begin to soften, until you miss something hard enough to beg the past to stay, until you mourn louder than you live. That's when it slips in through your voice, your habits, your grief. And when it smiles, that's when you know it has learned how to walk without you. Suri closed her eyes, took one final breath, and stepped forward. Not back, not away. She walked straight into the crowd of shadows, head held high, feet steady in the mud. Not to run, to face it. To call it by what it was. Not Idris, not her grandmother's curse, not a mirror, but the weight of not letting go. She opened her mouth, not to scream, not to pray, but to say goodbye. I am not your echo, and you are not my skin. The shadows flinched. The bodies began to lose form, dripping at the edges like watercolor left in the rain. Some tried to speak, some tried to beg. One even smiled and reached for her face, but Suri didn't blink. She didn't cry.
She simply watched them fade, one by one, as her silence finally stopped feeding them. The last one to disappear looked exactly like her, but it wore no expression, only absence. And when it faded into the wind, the swamp began to drain, not with water, but with memory. The air cleared, the ground hardened, and the only shadow left was her own, still, quiet, and hers. She walked back to the village at sunrise. The sky had color again. People stood at their doors, blinking in the morning light, unsure why their hearts felt lighter. Her mother met her at the gate with eyes red from crying, but blinking, alive. Suri hugged her, tight. And for the first time in days, the hug was real, warm, solid. Later, she stood alone beneath the banana tree where she'd buried the mirror shards. She didn't dig them up. She didn't need to. She simply whispered, "Go." Not to banish, not to curse, but to release. And when she turned to leave, the wind picked up, just enough to carry her voice somewhere old, somewhere listening, somewhere quiet. Because in the end, the curse was never about spirits. It was about holding on to something long after it let go of you. And in that holding, shaping it with grief until it learned to smile. So if you ever walk alone at dusk and your shadow begins to lag, don't ask why. Don't turn around. Just remember, you don't cast this shadow. It chooses you. And once it smiles, it's already hungry.